Muted.
Okay, looks like about
15 different folks here.
good
There.
All right.
Okay. Every once in a while, I may have to move up
And,
we do this here. Sure. And check it on the computer.
Okay, yeah. Okay. Thanks, Donnie. Okay,
All right. Here. Okay. Are you there, Brent?
I am here.
Okay. And the work session's in session. As soon as. Okay. So. Walk us through.
Certainly. So we've got two plans here to work with tonight. I'm going to start with the short one, the seismic resiliency and mitigation plan. This seismic resiliency and mitigation plan came about when we were working on our water master plan and our water conservation plan. This was an add-on that we could do while they were doing the work, and part of it was working through a grant as well. And what we wanted them to do is take a look at our system. And it's, folks, if you're online, if you can mute yourselves, we're getting some noise. That would be helpful. Thank you very much. So the seismic resiliency and mitigation plan is all about the water system. It is about ways to go ahead and take a look at this, look at our water system as it is now, and look at what some of the future projects that we could get into to even harden our water system in regards to resiliency. This is the shorter plan. It's fairly easy. And what this does is it sets us up to start looking at capital expenditures, projects in the future. But one of the biggest benefits of this type of plan is, oh, thank you, Aaron, is also to help us to apply for grant funding in the future. So there's quite a bit of grant funding out there for hazard mitigation in regards to some of the infrastructure. And there's a lot of money coming down from the government and again, soon having to do with this kind of infrastructure. So we worked with people like Chris Hyatt, the planners, Milton D. Larson, who helped design our water system. We worked with a little bit with Begami in regards to getting the information about what we're looking at in the future. And let me just double, okay, we're good. And so it lays it out. So after the references and the executive summary, the introduction and the overview is just right in there. But basically, I'll just read through this and kind of set the stage. The city of Gearhart operated a public water utility located north of Seaside and the Mechanical River along Highway 101. We're responsible for supplying water, of course, to property owners within the city. Due to seasonal fluctuations, we serve as few as 1,500 people to as many as 7,000 is our estimate through PSU and our estimates in the amount of people that come here and visit us. Civil West Engineering is the firm that we used, and they were working on our water conservation plan as well. And they're commissioned to do this seismic risk assessment mitigation plan. affectionately known as the shrimp. The staff got together and we worked through this plan. Mark McFadden and his team were definitely involved. Mark wasn't able to be here tonight, but this will kind of give you an idea of what we're working with. The purpose of this is regarding basically our potable water system. This isn't looking at the septic systems or anything like that. And they're looking at giving us recommendations that we have gone through. These recommendations and these upgrades are under a plan for about 50 years. Water systems are expensive, of course. The upgrading on some of these older systems takes a long time. We do have a lot of work to do. So the purpose of this is those recommendations. We reviewed the planning elements, the design criteria, guidelines. We looked at the impacts of the seismic events, geothermal and structural evaluations. These folks were on site as well and did tours with our system. It also talked about the different seismic scenarios and the events that we will be operating under. And a summary of each water system component, its condition, the vulnerability, and the susceptibility to seismic damage. We're also identifying the upgrades that are potential for this and the improvements to address our vulnerabilities. And they also have a summary of recommended capital improvements with a prioritization as well. So the first part of this plan on page 6 is just really about the seismic risk assessment. And I think we've all been pretty familiar with that, but we are looking at it. It is a Cascadia subduction zone type earthquake, a very large earthquake. And it is going to decimate this area in the county. And any of these items that we're looking at will only help us improve our resiliency, but it does not mean that these items in this system will not fail. Some of these items in here are kind of safe to fail, meaning that it's okay, we understand that things are going to fail, but this is how we're going to plan for bringing ourselves back into a workable situation. I'm not going to go through the guidelines and the immediate impacts of the seismic events. That's all from information in the past. On page 9, it kind of gives you the maximum wave elevation profiles and a lot of the geologic seismic information. But essentially what we've been planning for and what we set the bar for was, again, looking at that medium tsunami. That portion of the tsunami where it is most likely, if it is to happen, when it happens, how it will affect this community. So a lot of that was based on things that are at 50 feet elevation and above and 50 feet in elevation and below. And pretty well, our entire water system is within the inundation zone approximately.
No, yeah.
And hey, Preston, we can still hear you there. So if you've got a chance to mute, that would be good. Thank you, sir. This also talks about the seismic activity itself, liquefaction, and landslides. Talks about the lateral spread of things. So when you get shaking, you get sand that settles, you get spreading. So that's some factor that was looked at. Subsidence was looked at. So when the earthquake happens, this area is going to see some subsidence, meaning that it's going to drop a few feet permanently in this area. So things such as McCormick Gardens Road and the swamp and then behind will kind of become a new permanent lake. And so that was taken into account as well. And the damage from a tsunami, including the damage that would happen to our well system that's out in the dunes, what is there now, and then they also looked at what we would have available to us. We looked at our water supply sources, and we have 2, really 3 that are in here. The groundwater source is, of course, what we have out on the dunes. And there is a mistake in here under section 2.3.1, the water supply, where it shows that, we just found this today, as a matter of fact. This is a 14 wells drilled with 8 wells implemented. That's actually not true. We have 8 wells drilled and a total of 14 that we can go up to. So we have spaces and we have the permits to continue to drill wells if we need to, such as if on an everyday basis, if one was failed or fouled or was no longer producing, we have areas within the beach dunes to put more of them in, and we're permitted to do so. So we have our groundwater source. That's our main water source that we have. That water source is approximately taking water from depths of anywhere between 60 feet and 150 feet. Most of our wells are down to the 150-foot level, but they do kind of come up and down depending on what our needs are, the flow and the geography around them. Currently, we're able to flow as much water as we need to make with our system that we have. That could be year-round if the permit was ever to be changed so that we could take full water in the summertime. But right now, because of our distance from the Neocoxy Creek, we're only under part water or partial water, restricted through the summertime. So with that, we also have the Warrenton Intertie. Another update we're doing on this one of the Warrenton Intertie is there's actually 2 tie-ins for the Warrenton water system. There's one here in Cormorant Gardens Road, Pacific Way, essentially. And then there's another one near Dairyland on the other side of town. We can accept water from the city of Warrenton in those 2 connections, and we turn them on and off frequently depending on what our needs are. And if there was an emergency, we would be able to turn those on and off fairly quickly as well. The Warrenton Intertie provides water from their water system that's right up above the city of Deerheart. So we're the first customer essentially on the Warrenton Intertie. So we also have an intertie with the city of Seaside. That intertie is located right near the Sons of Norway area. And that is a smaller water intertie that we can use in emergencies. And we have turned that intertie on as recently as a year ago to help Seaside with a water main break that they had, so that we can continue to push water their way and help them out in that emergency. Of course, there's meters on there and everything is accounted for, so that the billing would work as agreed upon with those cities already. And that is in place with both Warrenton and Seaside. So we're looking at the aftermath on 2.27. And so due to the nature of the type of event that we're going to have with landslides, unknown weaknesses, it's really impossible to predict where and what extent the damage to the system will occur. Advanced preparation, you can reduce the chances of impact to selected areas. When the shaking and the flooding stop, city staff and its officers will make assessments to see where the damage has occurred and take actions to save as much water as possible from draining through broken pipes. And that's a pretty big portion of this as well. We also looked at electrical power through Pacific Power, and we also talked about our power generation abilities and put that all into effect. Now I'm just kind of giving an overview. I'm skimming through page 12 and aftermath, and 2.3, which is seismic risk assessment and mitigation. Again, we looked at the water supply sources, we looked at water treatment, we looked at water storage, and we looked at water distribution, which are all parts of our water system. And the backbone of the system is really the distribution system and the pipes that we have in place. Some of them are new, many of them are quite old. There is also technology out there coming up that or things available to us that we can put into place to even minimize water loss and damage to systems during these types of events. Some of these items that we've talked about in here as well will not only help during the tsunami and an earthquake, but also makes us more resilient to all sorts of other catastrophes that can happen, even as simple as a major water main break. Our goal is to provide drinking water for people, of course. And then our goal is to also provide water source for emergency operations during these events. Those are the two most important things that we're looking at. So this plan, looking at all these items, comes together and gives us some areas to work on. On page 14, you can see the descriptions, kind of starts on 15 with the water distribution system. But to kind of give you an idea of what we're working with, we have the seaside intertie listed out, our groundwater intake and storage, our groundwater transmission pipelines, and our raw water conveyance, which is the submersible pumps and such in each well, how we get the water out. We looked at the water treatment facility constructed in 2012. It was constructed under the new building code in regards to resiliency. So that building was built to the current standards. There's a lot of concrete, a lot of rebar, and a lot of parts and pieces in that are buried within the concrete. And then the plant itself is designed to operate with some minor impacts for sure, but is also set up to shut down appropriately when things start happening, or can be shut down in an emergency. But just shutting down a system in an emergency, such as an earthquake and things like that, to have everything automatically and just quickly stop is not a goal of the city necessarily. We still need to have water to prepare for and to take care of emergency situations, whether that be fire, drinking water, and that sort of thing. So we're looking at different areas in order to help kind of classify the type of environment we're dealing with and how the water system is going to work. The summary of recommendations is on page 17. So everything before 17 is telling the story of our water system. And I think many of you are pretty familiar with the way that our system works. But the summary recommendations are there. And those are what I would like to go through at this time. So far, any questions? All right, so the recommendations that they're making, and I'll just read this first paragraph, but there are several improvements the city can do to phase in over the next 50 years to make our system more resistant to damage, more resilient, and returning to service. Part of this planning that we're doing, especially, the emergency operations plan, this plan, the transportation systems plan, our water conservation plan, and all of those are designed to give us direction and emergency response to harden and to respond to these events. Under resiliency, it's really kind of a bell curve. So as we're going along our everyday, good times, nice weather, beautiful day, if an event happens, such as a cascaded subduction zone earthquake or what have you, all of our local communities are going to go down. Water systems are going to go down, sewer systems are going to go down, electrical, all of the connections that we have are going to go down, and including our system, even if we go through these recommendations. The benefit to having these plans and to begin working on these is the communities that are more prepared and trying to be more resilient, as they're at that bottom phase of the worst, what can happen during a major event. How long we stay at that bottom phase where we are just trying to respond, trying to get things back and going, and trying to bring water and supplies back to people. With these plans and this resilient efforts, we will be able to recover faster than without doing these sorts of things. That's pretty simple, but that is really the entire goal of most of these plans that the city's been working on really hard over the last 5 years or so. So the faster we can get back up is dictated based on some of these recommendations and some of the things that we have already in place. So in summary, the seismic related recommendations include some more expert evaluations and analysis of our specific water system components. We're pretty well aware of what we have in the ground, and we're aware of their age. Having an expert come in and help paint that picture for us and to help us with prioritizing some of these projects is a really wise idea and something that we would probably move forward, especially before we start talking about these major projects. An engineering geologist should be engaged to check the tank site of Warrenton and the intertie, tank site and Warrenton intertie lines. And coordinating with the city of Warrenton as well, with their system and the condition of transmission lines. They also recommend an inspection of the settling basins in Clearwell, and that should be conducted every 5 years, which we have not done there. And that has to do with the settling, the Clearwell, which is where our clean water is before it gets pumped out to the public. For example, underneath the tennis courts, we have a 250,000 gallon tank of water. That is a tank that's very well built. Very thick concrete, and it was one of the reasons that the costs went so high during the first, after the first bond was issued to the water treatment facility and during the appeal process. At that time, a lot of things changed, but most importantly, including was the building code and the amount of critical infrastructure building code that we needed to adhere to make that building safe. So it was built under the current codes, and it is robust building, not perfect. Structural engineer should evaluate the water treatment building as well as look at the placement of the motors, pumps, storage tanks, and other appliances at the plant to ensure they are properly placed and prevent failure at site of the event. That's something that we have done when we're constructing, but should be reevaluated and looked at for future projects, and to be able to see if there's anything that we're missing and ideas to make our system even a little bit better with hopefully some simple repairs. Item number 2 in summary, they said they'd like us to have better tools and equipment necessary to repair large sections of pipeline and many small breaks. So they have suggested a stock of approximately 3% of the total system pipeline. That's a lot of pipe. So that's something that we probably have to look at as a capital expenditure type project. Get a list of all the pipes and parts and pieces that we need and make sure that those are staged appropriately.
And it's not something you can just throw out in the sun and let it sit there. It has to be in a
Some of it you can and some of it you can't. We do need interior storage for some of this, and I think they mentioned some of that as well.
Okay.
Another area is to keep a supply of various size repair bands and fittings to facilitate the repair of a minimum of 10 breaks. And I think we meet that now. We have a good supply of repair bands and equipment in our water shop that is available to us. We could do some more. I think we have an adequate supply, but that's one thing that, again, another thing that we'll take a look at. They also recommend storing vehicles, parts, materials above and out of the tsunami zone. This was something that just kept coming up, that if all of our materials, all of our facilities, and all of our tools and vehicles are in the tsunami inundation zone, of course, we'll be much less able to respond during these sorts of events. Another one they talked about is an emergency cache at the 1 million gallon storage tank. And for those of you that don't know, our 1 million gallon storage tank is located right up above us to the north of the Warrenton water treatment facility. And it is 1 million gallons. It was built in the new current standards, but it's still a fiberglass steel infused tank on a lot of concrete that will likely shake and shift during these type of events. That was all considered. And so now you also look at the transmission lines that come from that particular reservoir, and what can we do to put fail safes in there, whether it be seismic switches that actually close valves, better ways to actually cut this system off and come up with some alternative ways to get the water down the hill. But again, we want to keep as much water as possible. So sometimes shutting the system down with these auto valves would be appropriate. They also talked about training the city staff on using the ham radios and coordinating with local ham radio club for emergency equipment usage. That's a little light, and we'll talk about more of this in the emergency operations plan, but this is something that we work on all the time, our emergency communications. So I just left a couple of pieces out there that we have. We have the mobile ham unit, we have satellite phones, we have 2 of those for the city. The fire chief has one, and the other one stays here at City Hall. And we have all sorts of various radios, but we have plans and how to keep that up and move, and the fire department is integral in that. It also talks about installing a seismic valve, the 1 million gallon storage tank that I talked about before, to conserve the water when the breaks occur, and the water storage needs to be isolated. That's a great idea. It needs to be well planned out because you don't want a seismic valve closing for no apparent reason. So it needs to be built correctly, and it needs to be built with the appropriate ideas of how it's going to perform. They also recommend that we locate all valves and meters, and if they're covered with debris and dirt, that we could use those GPS coordinates to find these valves and meters, dig them out, and be able to start making some shutoffs as necessary. This is something that we have done that needs to be updated. Our hydrants and our valves are all GPS located currently, but we need to go through and make sure that those are accurate and then add some things that have been added over the years. They also talk about an existing emergency response plan should be periodically reviewed and updated to ensure the plan is current. And that will
Chad, can I interrupt for a second? Because we still have, I think, at least 2 and maybe 3 viewers that are not muted, and we're getting feedback and disruption.
Let me see if I can fix that real quick. You're right back. This is out on vacation today, so I'm taking that one as well.
One of them switched off on their own, but I think we might have 2 others.
Thanks for that, Brent. We don't hear anything except for the occasional "get out of here" or something like that.
Okay, I think we're good to go now.
Okay, thank you so much.
So it's using, so again, we're talking about the existing emergency response plan being periodically reviewed and updated to ensure the plan is current. So those are things, and those plans have yet to be drawn up for the most part. Our water master plan and conservation plan has a lot of these things in them, but that has not been updated with these new recommendations until the city council adopts them. Moving forward as far as the ideas that we have here. And then that way we can enter them into these other plans that we have as well. It also talks about annually setting aside funding for sections of existing pipe to replace with resilient HDPE, high density polyethylene, for transmission line segments, or C900 for smaller areas. Those are both flexible type pipes that can be installed, and they're a little bit better in these type of scenarios. Not perfect, but it would definitely make it easier to repair, and it would help sustain us during the time if they did survive. It also talks about seismically restraining all equipment within the water treatment plant. We have most of that done. There's just a few items that probably need to be seismically restrained. And if you remember, a couple of years ago, we went through that process where we introduced a break tank, a water break tank, to help the plant operate a lot better. That was designed seismically, although in the future it's going to be updated, but those things are in place pretty well. And particularly, they wanted us to participate in what's called ORWARN, or the Oregon Water Wastewater Agency Response Network. So basically, ORWARN is a mutual aid with other communities that may have not been affected by these kind of things. And you use memorandums of understanding and mutual aid agreements. And these other communities from other areas can also come in and help us with our systems and to get them back up into place. So the conclusion of this particular report, this is a small one, the water system improvements recommended and the current water master plan are a significant undertaking. The projects will require strong public support and financial assistance. The city of Deer has a pretty good reserve fund for water, but it's not enough to do all of these things that we need to do. So we're going to have to plan for them and grant write as well. The city should consider necessary water system improvements to create a more seismically resilient system. And the initial steps that they have put down here, I think would be helpful. Public information and outreach campaigns so people understand where we are and what we're working on. A meeting with Business Oregon, USDA rural development, which we have learned that again, USDA is not necessarily applicable to the city of Deer Heart because of our the wages and salaries of this area is not necessarily down to where the USDA gives grants for. But there are Business Oregon, other agencies to consider these options. There is, again, an influx of funding coming down the pipe from the federal government. And with these type of plans, we're going to be able to write these grants for them. And I think that Deer Heart is pretty ripe for these types of grants. The city of Deer Heart has had 10 years ago where they had none of these plans, including transportation systems plans, an updated hazard mitigation plan, emergency operations plans we had, but they were really kind of more boilerplate. These are much better. All of these plans that we work with enables us to apply. We use those plans to show them that we have a idea of the direction we want to head, and they're more apt to fund us with some of these ideas. So that's essentially what the plan is about. This actually will be added into our water master plan and conservation plan as part of that larger plan that we have. And it's really kind of a simple overview of what it is that we need to work on. And from there, we just get down into the nitty-gritty, start planning, come up with these ideas, come up with the costs and the future costs of them, and begin planning our capital expenditure moves in the future for the city of Deer Heart. So that's my little presentation on what this plan is about. And it was a pretty easy one to get through. And now I'd just like to open it up to you folks to see if you had any questions or concerns or ideas that maybe you think of something that's not on there.
Chad, I wasn't here when the water treatment plant was installed and created. And I know that this, what we just talked about is its vulnerability in a seismic event. Are you confident that it's not vulnerable to tampering or?
No, not entirely. There's always something that we can do that's better. And we're actually working on that through the process that we're doing with City Hall as well. We would like to see a better camera system and entry point, exit point at the plant itself. But for the most part, it was designed to be a secure site. The fencing that's around the clear well that we have there, where there's the 250,000 gallons of clean drinking water, is secure and is not able to be accessed easily at all. The water treatment facility plant right now is secure, but there are some more things that we can do to it. And I think a camera system and that just for the security of it will be good.
It's alarmed?
It is alarmed, both in fire and in as a burglar alarm, I suppose, for lack of a better term. And it's locked up and secured with exterior gates as well. So this is one area where the city is securing its critical infrastructure with those type of gates, and we're able to get some of these tools in and out. The other thing about the plan is it is probably the nearest that we have to something that would be out of the medium inundation zone, as its elevation is right around 46 feet. We're planning 50 feet and below as being the tsunami, but that is at one of the higher levels. But it is still squarely in the inundation zone.
And I noticed that it said in there, it recommended that you have the generator set to where they don't start while they're underwater. Is that already been taken care of?
No, that has not been taken care of. As a matter of fact, we're not too sure about that plan as of yet. We don't have it set up to where it will do that. The generator system is set up to start automatically. And we would have concerns that in the middle of some sort of calamity, if that was to shut off, it would shut off all water supply to Deer Park. You wouldn't have any pressure, but for what was left in the reservoir up above, creating some pressure. And that is susceptible very much to breakage. So we would lose all pressures at a time where we might need them quickly. But the plan would be that over time, as things kind of come to, we figure out where we're at, we're able to start shutting things down now. But it is not an automatic system, and we want to learn more about that. But we're not at this point looking to just make that happen at the moment. We want to learn a little bit more.
I have a question. I know that in the course of a major tsunami event that we wouldn't be able to rely on the Warrant and Seaside Intertide, is that correct?
Probably not.
What about a minor or medium event?
That's something that needs to be gone through, and that's part of the process of somebody coming in and taking a closer look at our pipes and connections. We have a lot of old pipe in the ground. For an example, the water transmission system under Highway 101 is probably one of the oldest areas that we have in Deer Park, and is something that would be a priority for us. And so we need to have a better picture of how things will perform under these circumstances. And that would be one of the first things that we would want to do with this plan, is bring the experts, talk about the seismic resiliency of what we have, also talk about the exactly what we have in the ground and how it will perform, and then we can make even better decisions. This is just the beginning of that. There's
Right.
nothing really specific other than the emergency valve that will be installed on the 1 million gallon piece. But more ideas will come out of this study that we would continue to move forward on. But doing those studies and those things without a plan is really not the most economical way to do things. So with this idea and some professionals that work around Oregon and elsewhere, we think that we can do quite a few things without spending a whole lot of money to at least get us part of it. And then from there, we're going to have to make some bigger decisions as a community of how far away we are from making some of these repairs and how we would potentially fund them in the future. Grants aren't going to be the only way that we're going to have to do this. It's going to have to also be the community itself to figure out ways and be creative so that we can go ahead and combine our efforts with grant money and or state emergency funds that are available. But with this in the plan as well, we'll also know better how to respond. When we know how this system is going to work and what is likely to happen in the event, we'll be able to tailor our response a little bit better, and then go ahead and handle this system so it does the least amount of damage and loses the least amount of water as possible. Other things that we'll be talking about that are more under the emergency operations plan is, let's say the system is down and lots of breaks around town, but we have contained through valving the system so it's losing less, if any, water at all. Then how do we move into the recovery phase to where we have water available for people while we are recovering from these sorts of things? At what point do we know that we are in crisis? There's going to be trigger points to say that, okay, if we have lost this much, the clear well is empty and this is empty, we need to start thinking about policy and procedure for how we're going to provide for our residents and its visitors. Just for give you an idea of some of the things we're thinking about is, and some of the things that we have in place is we actually have 2 other water filtration units that are in the storage containers that are up out of the inundation zone. These filtration units can come in and I'm going to take a guess here, but it'll be close, can produce almost 150 gallons a minute of clean water right from a raw water source that we can get ourselves into. And then we can microfiltrate it with these systems, throw in and add a little bit of chlorine, and then we have drinking water for the people that could be here within our community stuck for a period of time. We also have the ability to go ahead and insert and install a sand point well system, to where once you have a hole started and you get into some sand in an area where there's a water aquifer, we can, through pumping water and with things that we would have on hand, be able to drop a pipe into an aquifer at almost any location and then produce water from there. And whether that be just adding chlorine for the moment or hooking up those 2 water filtration units that we have as spare, those are things that the staff and Christie and the fire department have already written grants for, and we've received a lot of money. We have a lot of supplies to accommodate some of these things. So that's kind of the idea of this whole portion of this. We would like to insert it into our other water plans, and then we would begin working on figuring out what it's going to take to learn more.
Chad, what's our confidence level that our pipe schematics for the type of piping that we have at the ground is accurate?
We have an accurate assessment of the type of pipe that we have in the ground now. We don't know exactly how it's going to perform, but we do have full city maps, both available to the city staff through our GIS system, which is a map where it lays all of this out. So we have all of our water pipe in there. We redid that when we installed the water treatment facility, and after that was done, we updated that information. There have been a couple of valves installed that may not be on that plan right yet, and there's also a lot of connections and individual connections to houses that we haven't plotted out on that map system, but it will be there. And so, for example, each individual water meter will be placed on that GIS map with all the information about it as well. That's not so helpful in this type of atmosphere, but all of that information is good when we're trying to deal with this.
How many of our hydrants are breakaway hydrants?
Oh, I think most,
For if they get collided with by a vehicle, all of them. They're all dry barrel hydrants, so stem goes down anywhere between 5 to a maximum maybe 15 feet in depth. So if it snaps off it, as long as that plunger per se at the bottom was still seated, top of it will just snap off. But depending on how it's hit, there is sometimes it'll damage the bottom of the hydrant. Like for instance, the last time that occurred was over off of Pfeiffer Heights, to where they hit it, they could see a little bit of bubbling from underneath the ground, but over the duration of time and it not being dealt with or being shut off, it had took out the whole hillside next to it. So out of the hydrants that I've seen over the past 9 years that run over, only about 2 or 3 of them have actually caused an issue. And that's over maybe a dozen, some that haven't been replaced.
there are, and through this process, there are other hydrants that need to be upgraded because they are older style and they're not as robust as the newer ones that we're installing. But one of the things that helps us is that, you know, because we can get freezing weather, our hydrants are all built with that system for the breakaway because it's underground. If you go to Hawaii, all of their hydrants are live right up at the top. You know, go unscrew a cap and turn it on, the water comes on. Whereas these ones, the water valve is much down farther below. So that top part of the hydrant, as he said, is dry.
Chad, I know you said in our last meeting that we had a little bit of money. And knowing that it's gonna really disrupt a lot of traffic, if we start working on the 101, what are the odds that we could time that with or around ODOT's project out there so that we don't, there's nothing worse than seeing them put in some roadway and then tear it up again and start working on it again. And
some of us will remember that time where we were talking about a bypass about, oh, what was that, 15 years ago?
yeah.
There was a lot of money available to this area as if it wanted to go ahead and upgrade Highway 101. Some of the communities says, no, we're not going to take that because we'd rather have a bypass. And ODOT was like, well, we're not going to do that for you. So the money's went elsewhere. But under the current transportation systems plan, that conversation happens all the time. And so depending on what we do with Highway 101, at every opportunity we have to open up these pipes, we will make changes to improve it. I'll give you an example of one that was the sixplex that was just approved out here on Highway 101 that's currently being built by the Johnson family. When we get that ditch open, we're gonna look at that area, we're gonna replace a section of pipe at that area that we're working on to connect in with some of the other stuff. And we're gonna take the opportunity to install another fire hydrant as well. Most of that's being taken care of by the developer. And then the city, with us installing a fire hydrant above and beyond, will take on that expense. But it always seems to be a public-private type atmosphere where when we have things open, we get to them when necessary.
How often does Seaside of Warrenton and our water department talk?
All the time. So our water, public works guys and the Warrenton water, public works guys are in a lot of communication. We check on each other's valves, we make sure that that's running. The water plant operator for Warrenton and the water plant operator for Gearhart have worked together so that they can help each other as well. There's a mutual aid agreement kind of in place for those operators to come down and assist us, and for our operators and public works guys to go and assist them as well. Now we have some new staff that are coming into the city of Warrenton. We have a new city administrator and potentially another of their engineers, their main engineer, their public works director. It may be new soon. And so we're gonna have to reestablish those communications and have meetings with them, but that's on the agenda already, to have those discussions once they get them hired. City administrator, we have meetings quite a bit with all the city administrators, and we do talk about these sorts of things occasionally. So we're all kind of on the same playing field. And when you look at the communities around here on the coast, it's not, we try not to think about it as these individual communities. We try to think about it as just one large community working together. And so Cannon Beach is a little bit on its own because of distance, and it doesn't have any interties with Seaside in that. But still, we would offer assistance. And their water operator, the city of Warrenton, assisted us as well. They had to oversee our operators for a period of time while our certifications came into play. So there are people within the city of Warrenton that are currently familiar with operating our system. So any other questions or comments about that?
Not for me.
I think it's something that we should keep in the back of our minds during any negotiations we have, if we were to take over any other property in the future. That should be, I think that having somebody who would want to be a partner with us and meeting some of our goals would be important.
Certainly. And the developers are partners with us as well. I mean, using the example of what we've been talking about over the last few years with the cottages at Gearhart site, the intention was if that area, if that site was to come into the city urban growth boundary or within our municipal boundaries, we would really like to take the end of the Pine Ridge Drive connection and shoot that all the way through this development that they're talking about, and then connect to the water mains that we actually own, that the city does, going up Highlands Lane. It's a main transmission line, and it would enable us to go ahead and shut off larger parts of Gearhart while still maintaining water service to other parts of Gearhart. Currently, if we had to make a water shut off because of a water main break in that area, we would have to take out a pretty large swath of Gearhart. But when you put this into place, if we had a water main break, we could, with valving, reroute water essentially to areas that were not broken and isolate those areas that are. So the infrastructure and the connections that we need to make. We just did a project, I think maybe within the last 2 years, to where we did two things. There was a main water main that was underneath the golf course in Gearhart across the second and whatever other, or this,
Number 1 and number 9.
thank you, not much of a golfer. Number 1 and number 9, where we actually had a water line that was going through their property that was established many years ago. We abandoned that line and then created a loop system right where the Gerhart Green condominiums are. The reason why we abandoned that is if something happened to it and it destroyed the golf course, it may be the city's responsibility. So that was one reason, and it was older pipe, smaller pipe. What the connection that we made that whole area a little bit more robust and controlled. So every opportunity we take, and we've got other various projects that we want to accomplish, you know, in the near future. But some of them are going to be large enough to where we're going to need to talk about the money.
But I would like to keep that in the back of our mind when we're talking with anybody about that land up there that, I mean, there's no doubt they stand to make a lot of money if we do take them into our urban growth boundary and whatnot. And it would be good for the folks that they would intend to sell their houses to have some of these issues already resolved or already have a solution in place, working towards a solution. Nobody wants to buy a house and then find out, hey, it's gonna cost me more money. I have to, you know, work out some more money to meet some goals that were already identified.
Yeah.
So I think that should be part of whatever negotiations going on in the future, just mine.
Yeah, and again, under the public-private, a lot of the upgrades that we do are at those opportunities where developers are building. Such as what we're doing on Highway 101 Johnson Town now.
I appreciate that.
So anything else? Okay, thank you. We're gonna bring this back to you again, so that the council can formally adopt it. If anytime between now and then, you have any ideas or concerns, please let us know. But we'll present it to the council and it's still workable from there. If there are some changes we need to make, we'll make them and then we'll come back again. This is something that needs to be done right, but does not necessarily need to be done right away, so that we can do it right. All right, from there, we want to move on to the emergency operations plan. Sound good, Mayor?
Yeah.
All right, so this is a much thicker plan, but there's a lot of background information and information about response and that is in here that we don't necessarily need to go over with word for word, nor do we have the time right now. And if we're not able to get through this with your satisfaction, you can always schedule another work session. We cancel this from a future council meeting, put it back into a work session so that we can work on some more things. The emergency operations plan has been kind of a Bible for the city of Gerhart, and we have had one in place for years that has really not been adequately updated because it was an older system and we've done a lot of changes over the years. And so this was a perfect and an opportune time to work with this emergency operations plan. The other reason that makes this a perfect time is that the city of Gerhart, the city of Warrenton, and actually all the cities in Clatsop County are now, over the last couple of years, working with our hazard mitigation plans. And we're working them together in one meeting with all of these cities. We're updating our plans individually, but they're made now to work a lot better with each other. This emergency operations plan for the city of Gerhart is a framework. It does not have all of the details in it on how to respond to every different type of call. A lot of times you can't foresee those kinds of things, and you know the people that we have in place, such as Chief Hutch and the other firefighters, and Josh and Mark and Jeff are very good, very handy people that are able to respond to some of these things. I'll give you the 2007 storm. That was an example. There was no real indication or planning for the 2007 storm. Our emergency operations plan did not cover that specifically. Now, windstorm, sure. But when it really came down to it, the city staff, the fire department, the emergency services, plus a ton of volunteers within the community came out and we made it work. I think that I was involved in that as I was with the fire department, not with the city at that time. And the current the city manager back then, Dennis McNally, with a Coast Guard background and emergency response background, they did a really nice job. Of course, nothing went perfect. The things that they set up in that type of atmosphere were, okay, let's get the dangerous trees down. And they send crews out to do that and get the dangerous trees down. Then they set up a place for all those trees to go. And if you remember, we had that giant pile of trees across the way. That wasn't in any plan. Those kind of things came up with a team of people inside and outside the city, coming up with some great ideas. Then suddenly the city manager came up with this idea, and I'm not sure who helped him, but well, let's start bringing in from Recology all sorts of dumpsters. And the reason he brought those in was because he knew that after a period of time, everybody's freezers and refrigerators were starting to go bad. You've got bad food out there. You've got all sorts of garbage coming up from this type of situation. We needed to start handling it. So his idea was to bring that in. And we learned some things from that. And now it's all on our mind and it can be encapsulated in our plans that we have now. But no plan is perfect. What is the old saying? No plan survives contact with the enemy. This is designed to do the best job possible to survive that contact, but still give us some ability to work within it. So I'm gonna skim some of these things because of timing. We talk about, you know, who the plan administrator, how we're gonna distribute this plan, how we're going to communicate this plan, what type of, how much of this plan will we share with the public? What should we redact, what shouldn't we redact, just for homeland security type things. There was, so on page, so page 7, B11, we have the plan organization for the basic plan itself. And I'm looking at this page here. Talks about the way that this is laid out for us, with the idea of the introductions, the community risk and resiliency. So establishing what our risks are and how to be resilient to them, what our jurisdictional authorities are, what local emergency management agency coordination will look like. And this is about 7 pages in from the start for those of you that are who our partner organizations are and how do we cooperate with them. What is the concept of operations? You mean the framework that I was talking about, from initial assessment all the way through recovery. So we have an event, we have assessments, we get through into the recovery phase, and it helps us with that. Emergency Operations Center and its management. And Chief Hutch is going to talk a little bit about some of the EOCs that we've set up before, so you can kind of understand that even on some of the smallest things that we do, we establish an emergency operations center so we can get through these. And then how are we going to sustain the program moving forward? You know, what is going to be our tasks to make sure that this plan is up to date, to make sure that this plan is communicated, to make sure that this plan is practiced. You know, start going through some of these processes at every opportunity that we have, or to make our own opportunities, such as a tabletop organization. But for example, we used the emergency operations system on that water main break that was on G Street months ago. We didn't need to, Public Works had it handled, but we figured that we would practice our emergency operations and our EOC work. So we brought in all the department heads. And from that came a lot of good work. Chief Bowman had a lot of input on how to block the traffic so we can continue to move things around. The fire department decided that they were going to provide support to the Public Works Department, both in helping with traffic and giving them anything else that they needed, whether that be some supplies or to be there to just help out in those emergencies. Even the administrative staff in communication, we came up with a communication plan, how we're going to blog this out, what we're going to tell people, what area does this affect? And we came up with all of these things, and I think that just with that emergency operations center activation for a few hours really improved our performance, just because we got together and we came up with some ideas of how we can alleviate the problem. So the next page on let's see, page 8, functional accesses, and this is the III. It looks like this. This is a basic description of how the plan works with annexes. Annexes are the departments or the divisions that come together to help take a scenario and put it together as far as how we're going to respond, and then to continue to respond and recover. And those annexes are laid out there in color. The blue is management services, which includes information planning, resource support, public information, volunteers and donations. You know, people don't think about these things coming in through donations and volunteerism. Well, how are you going to handle them and put them into work, or to keep them safe, or to organize, or to know where people are coming into and out of? So that's the management services of part of this plan. Then we break into the emergency services, which is, you know, primarily police and fire and public works as well, but mostly police and fire. And that includes communications, firefighting, search and rescue, hazardous materials, and law enforcement. It encompasses all of those areas. Health and human services. So now we got to start thinking about and figuring out how our partners can help us with mass care, health and medical, food and water. Again, and this is where this plan plays into this resiliency part. Agricultural and animal protection. So people with horses, cows, and what have you that are displaced and what have you. And this is especially important. And what I want you to keep in your mind are events that happen all the time here in Oregon. These plans are the basis for how to perform in things such as major wildfire events. They use this a lot. And then that's when you can see all these things come into play, and including agricultural and animal protection was a big deal in those scenarios. And the nice thing about us sending people, and Josh would be here, but he is currently on which fire?
The Rum Creek Fire down in Grants Pass area.
So he was, the City of Deer Heart Fire Department was called up with 4 other agencies here in the county. We sent our resources, which is part of the plan. State of Oregon has been moving those resources much faster this year. It's a new way of thinking. You're actually putting people in place before they absolutely need them, and with the goal of keeping fires small, not as big. And I think so far they've been able to do that. Knock on wood. Dry season's still coming, but it seems to be working. Josh would have been here, and then that's again why I asked Chief Hutch to be here today. And Hutch is actually really well versed in this. James has been at these fires. He has operated under these auspices. We train how to use these emergency operations plan through FEMA and Homeland Security. We get certifications. We understand how this works. And we understand how the process goes, which is something that in the future we would like to bring all the counselors and the mayor into this as well, to become trained. So that when a situation happens, you folks can come in and understand how these work together and become a part of it. I mean, your initial part of this in a community, that when things go in a bad way, whatever that be, whether that be a mass casualty incident with a couple of buses or an airplane or that sort of thing, a wildfire, tsunami, and earthquake, you would be able to come in here to City Hall and with your knowledge be able to help as well. Work within the EOC or go out and get information from people. But one of the most important parts of this is this other document. And I'm sorry, Brent, I didn't get this to you, but it is in the plan as well. This is just the declaration of state of emergency by the city or county, procedures. And this document is an ORS 401-309, and it assists in a plan on how the city of Deer Heart could declare an emergency. And when we do so, that makes some things available to us that otherwise are not. It could be emergency procurement. It could be statements such as if we had a water crisis to where we could actually, in an emergency situation, ask people to not water their lawns and cut their water supply down. In a wildfire, you folks can declare an emergency and demand that people evacuate. And that's part of it. In the initial piece of all of this, you folks will be very much involved in incidents. And we're going to need the city, the residents are going to need your help in doing so. So politically, getting emergency declaration done is very important. The other thing about that emergency declaration and having these plans and having our hazard mitigation plan, which talks about all the big hazards. One of the things that will do for the city of Gerhard is when we have an emergency and we have these things in place, and we declare these different calamities an emergency, if we work through these plans, do them as they're outlined, account for everything that's going on, both in people and resources and expenditures. By having these plans and doing that correctly, we may and likely be, for major events, reimbursed for all of this. And that's a major piece. And that's one of the reasons we've been working so hard on trying to update these plans so that if anything does happen, that is something that occurs. And that can mean millions of dollars. You look at Hurricane Katrina, you look at all those things. Once you declare and you account for and you go through the processes, it makes the reimbursement and available funds come to the city of Gerhard much faster.
And also having these things in place and doing the tabletop exercises and the other things that I'm sure you're gonna talk about, make us a better candidate for grants when we're applying for them. Like give money away to people that are just gonna, waste it.
But if we can tell them in the past that we had this many tabletops, we've actually opened up the EOC on these small events and practiced them. We have a plan in place. And this is what we're looking for. Yes, you're absolutely right.
Chad, I did have a question. I did notice there were some emergency declaration forms, I think, in the appendix of the document that was provided. But my question was more of logistics, because chances are the disaster is not going to happen during a official meeting of the city council.
How dare they?
So if we're scattered to the four winds and the disaster happens, if a quorum is not possible, how do we circumvent the official requirement for an official meeting and notifications and that kind of thing?
The short answer is we do our best. There is a possibility that under a major event, some of you may not be available. There might even be a possibility that none of you are available. You could be out on vacation elsewhere. You could be trapped on the other side of town with no communication and all those sorts of things. With this ORS and the way that the state works, it gives us that difference to where we're able to do everything we can with what we've been dealt with and make these decisions, and it will be upheld. So there are a lot of options available to us. If we only have 2 counselors that are able to make it or that are in town, and we need to make these decisions, we can do that with 2 counselors if need be. We just have to document. And that's part of the emergency operations in the EOC, is to help document those sorts of things as well.
That makes a whole lot of sense.
If I might add.
Yes, please.
The state has gone through, like we mentioned in the wildfire scenario, they've gone through great efforts this last year to bolster resources throughout the state, to take a more aggressive approach to keeping fires small or incidents smaller. For instance, they got 15 strike teams on this last mobilization down to the Rum Creek fire. 3 of those task forces are in one tiny neighborhood. It's kind of an abundance of resources, and it kind of seems like a lot, but the state has also gone from saying, hey, our goal and our plan is going to be to keep fire small and we're going to protect the structures. But they've also said, hey, we need to be more dynamic and more flexible, that we're going to say, we're going to go out into the urban interface. We're going to go into the forest as well as protect these structures to, accomplish the goal. So they've, made OSFM staffing grants available to us. They've made more access to us so that we can contact state and federal resources. On the county level per se, we just went through changing of automatic and mutual aid agreements. What we use every single day for a medical call, structured fire, technical rescue call, whether it be for the water or a roads team. et cetera. They've gone and made a more aggressive approach to say, you know, if you need the resources, we can call for it. We can contact the duty officer with the county emergency management, and they can activate those local, state, and or federal resources, whether it's from our county, Tillamook, Washington, Columbia. They've done a lot to try to make that more accessible to incident commanders and EOC operators that are here.
And that's part of us knowing who our partners are and making sure that they know what our plans are. So that when these things do happen, you're not trying to set those plans, that they're already in motion. Things are happening. And if there were no communication and suddenly people start showing up to help out from other communities, it's because of this kind of thing. All right, on 8 at the beginning is the table of contents. I'm not going to go through it all. That gives you the layout of how this plan is put together. I'm going to stop by a few of these items here so that we can talk about them. And the first page after the table of contents I wanted you to look at was 1-8. Just talking about this when we get to 1-8. So there's also some acronyms back in page in the beginning part here on 18 that kind of gives some of the acronyms. We're not going to get too deep into that, but as you look at this plan again, take another look at those acronyms. If there's anything us emergency types really do well is speak in Greek with these acronyms. So if you find something that you don't understand what the heck we're talking about, please stop us and we'll clarify, because sometimes we go a little far. But I just wanted to point out the relationship to the other plans portion of this. The relationship to the other plans currently that we're working with and that this will be a part of is the Clatsop County Multi-Jurisdictional Hazard Mitigation Plan. That's the hazard mitigation plan for the county itself. This will also play with the Clatsop County Community Wildfire Protection Plan. And simply enough, it will also go into the Clatsop County Emergency Operations Plan. They understand our framework, we understand theirs, and this is all done using the same type of framework so that it's easily accessible and readable for various people to come in from out of state or even country. This framework is used nationwide. This framework is used by CAL FIRE to take care of a lot of those wildfires in California. This framework is used by the federal government, state police, federal police, FEMA, all of these different organizations use this same sort of plan. So when you see the sections and the annexes and wondering what the numbering is all about, it matches with all the other plans that were put together in this type of thing. Partner plans and procedures, how it works in consistency with state and federal plans is also important. So the persons that we use for this work with the state and their plans and designed it to work along with those individual plans. The next area I want to look at is 2.5.
Chad, could we back up to 2.1?
Sure.
I had a question on the 2.1.1 governance and jurisdictional considerations. So the first sentence says, city has an established governmental structure of a 5-member city council who oversee city operations, including a myriad of departments. So my understanding is normally we do not oversee departments. We provide policy and fiscal oversight. So is this a departure from normal reality during an emergency, or could you?
It's a good point. That is a good point. Now, you don't oversee directly. You go through me on certain departments, or Jeff Bowman through certain departments, or even under the city council is our treasurer as well. that you folks can, directly oversee, but really it is that mention of basically being the city council, overseeing the city as it is through policy, not necessarily operations, and that we are accountable. That's my take.
Okay, so if we are policy and oversight, not operations, this language is more operational. So it does appear to be a departure from the norm.
The size of the city might dictate that a little bit as well. Our resources of 13 employees here at the city of Deer Heart is not able to handle these things by ourselves. We're a smaller community, and even some of the smaller events can overwhelm us. Your participation is encouraged because we have a lot of people with a lot of different experiences here that can come in very handy. So it is a partnership. But the fact that you folks are overseeing the city and ensuring that the city is updating or has these plans, and then also that we are periodically reviewing them, that is the major work of the city council prior to an event. But during an event, we might just need to hand you a chainsaw.
I realize I can handle a chainsaw as well as the next guy, or lady. But that's still not direct oversight of city personnel. So I'm just trying to clarify our roles.
That is an important designation because, it's part of the council rules, but no, the city councilors on an individual basis cannot come in and tell city staff what to do. Now, under certain circumstances, that might be necessary. If I'm not able to make it back, one of you might have to be in charge of these things. But you're right, this is a separation of his powers as well. Your participation through policy and oversight is most important. Your participation during the event might be necessary. But it isn't that you are individually assigning tasks unless you have been assigned the task to assign tasks. And that's part of the Emergency Operations Center. And that's part of the different types of, you may come in and we may need you to work logistics. That'll put you in charge of some people. But on the ground and the emergency services, I think we would want to leave it up to the professionals that do this, such as Josh Hutch and their other firefighters, and Jeff Bowman and his team, but we would work within that. So thank you. I understand now that you're making that designation of you don't have direct contact, but it could happen.
Yeah, I think maybe some language clarification would be helpful.
Okay.
During the 2007 wind event, did Gerhart declare a state of emergency?
No, I don't recall.
I guess what my question is let's say that we did, and then Seaside did, and then the county did, then would we all be under the auspices of the county?
No.
How does that work?
That is established with the, and I'm gonna need your help a little bit with this, but the size of the event dictates that. We are in charge of our community. And we have full control of that community during these events. But there are times to where the event is just too large and we're not able to handle it. So there are then handoffs that happen. If we're in the recovery and in the moment, we may need to bring in people from the county to help us with oversight and working in the Emergency Operations Center. There is a portion in here, and we're going to get to it, but there's a name for the size of the unified command versus what's the other one? So area. Yeah, area command or geographical. So Dana, you know a little bit about this.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out a way to give you the Reader's Digest version. And I apologize if I use bad acronyms because this FEMA looked to Southern California, and my agency was one of the agencies that had already implemented an incident command system. We used to call it the incident command management system.
California was on the cusp of this, and we used this framework that came from California.
And they, other agencies around the United States looked at how we had to develop it because we have such a high population, so many counties working together, so many agencies constantly working together. And it does nobody any good if you can't communicate, if you are all, if there are too many chiefs and not enough agents. Sorry, that's a better way to say that. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
There's too many people trying to take charge, not enough people following, and the direction starts to get mixed. So we came up with a system in Southern California that allowed us to create a very a unified command where everybody knew their roles. And we weren't fighting against each other, we were working together, even when we were suddenly working with somebody who had radios that we couldn't communicate on our radios. Or like in our instance, we had the Christopher Dorner incident up in 2013, which was a 5-county active shooter that resulted in our county in a city very much like your heart. It was a second homeowner type of community that nobody ever went there, except the Hells Angels occasionally. But, we had him end up there, and it was a mess because we had people coming from, and it had happened, it occurred. It coincided with the worst storm of our winter. This is early February 2013, worst storm of our winter in Big Bear, which is the highest point in our, in our county. And we called for help. Everybody in the world rolled. They were rolling from Long Beach. They were rolling from Lahaina Beach. Now, none of those folks that showed up, they all had the best intentions, but none of them came up prepared. We couldn't talk to them. We didn't know, some of them were undercover, some of them were even wearing uniforms. None of them brought jackets, so there's problems that you have whenever you combine things. Now, so we in Southern California worked very well at doing this. And then they had the incident in New York with on 9/11, and they implemented a very similar system. And after that, FEMA said, hey, that works. Why don't we start to do that nationwide? Now, from that comes NIT. And what's important to know about that is that there are some people apparently in our community that seem to think that if the worst happens, we won't need to do anything. We just need to sit here and wait for the powers to be to come save us. They're not going to have the resources, and they're going to expect us to have an understanding of the system and rolling out the system in order to communicate our needs to them. And the better we are at this, the more prepared we are, the faster we are going to be serviced by the folks that are going to come to help us. So that's why it's important. So it's NIMS, there's a lot of acronyms, like you said, they're hard to keep, I can't even keep track of all of them, but anyway, that's the fastest way I can think to tell you why this is important.
Okay, I gotta stop you here and say, how about if we stop at 8 o'clock and continue this at another work session, or do you want to go until 8:30? Because we are scheduled just for an hour. Just need a consensus,
Yeah.
Chad, how much, if we were to go on, how much longer would it take for you to go through this?
I think I can boot through it in a half an hour, and then that way we can at least get that understanding and then finish up right there. I won't go into depth. I don't know, I'll go into less depth than I'm doing right at the moment as well. So
is that agreeable?
Yes.
Yes.
That's agreeable.
Okay, then we'll continue.
okay, so let's go to page 4.2. Just on 4.2.1, roles and responsibilities of the city administrator. As you know, kind of the person overseeing all of these items, it shows that my job is to maintain the operational readiness, serve as an advisor to the mayor and the city council, assist in coordination and situational awareness and incident documentation, serve as a liaison between the city, Clatsop County Emergency Manager, and the county EOC when activated, and serve as a liaison with the city emergency management agency, cooperators, and community partners. That's what we're doing here with this. We're bringing all these people in and learning how to work together. The next page I want to look at is 5.6 to 5.9.
Chad, could I hate to slow us down, but had a couple of questions that I wanted to ask. So in reading the document, you have a huge task. You wear a lot of different hats, and the succession plan that's outlined here is not very deep. So if you are not available, how many backups do you have in the succession plan? It looked like there was only one, and we probably need many multiples of that. And also the EOC locations, we have one designated at City Hall and one at the fire station, which is right across the parking lot. And normally having two EOCs that close together is probably not a good idea. Just because if something happens to one, it'll happen to the other. So now that's it. I'll let you respond. Thanks.
Well, the nice thing about this plan is that our emergency operators are trained to perform with this plan. So if any of us are missing, this plan gives us all the checklists and things that we need to think about and how to operate. So it can be done without any one of us. And with the plan and how it operates, especially after you start up the Emergency Operations Center, it's designed for people to pick up tasks that are not being picked up, or if somebody would have to leave or emergency or they weren't available, somebody would take on these things. It really gets down into what's called the planning P, and we'll look at that here in a little bit. But once the incident happens, we deal with what we have. We start moving forward into the assessment stage. We start doing the emergency operations. Then we consider all of that and then do it all again. And in those phases, anybody can be replaced or reassessed, reappointed, and that sort of thing. They asked us for really two, a secondary and a primary place where we actually have buildings that we could operate out of. The only two buildings we could really operate out of is this one and the fire department. But in the plan is also saying that at any time where those two are not available, we might just be at a pickup truck at the back of the tailgate and be able to operate an EOC out of that. Or we can put the EOC in any area here that we choose. So if we need to take over a building or something's not being used or be up at McMinimum's, we can set it there. The flexibility is in the plan. So currently we don't have many better places to go, for emergency operations center. One of the things that were talked about in our new fire station is doing something a little bit more robust with some great communications. But currently we have the things in place, we have the tools around, but we may have to completely change up our idea of what our secondary or primary and secondary areas are, and maybe end up at McMinimum's or a large house or that sort of thing. So that flexibility is built into that, and it's even mentioned.
Okay,
So
thank you.
Are you guys referring to like the continuity of government and operations when you go the succession?
Yeah, what page is that on?
It's on 3.6, you've got the emergency program managers, the city administrator, the fire chief, and then the mayor. And in reverse for emergency policy and governance, it's the mayor, city council, and then city administrator. Is that what you're referring to in this?
Yeah, I think that's what you're referring to.
Yeah. 3.6. Brent?
I'm looking for it.
It does show a pretty shallow group within that, but again, we have to look at the size of our city. But it says that the emergency program manager is the city administrator, but if that doesn't work out, in the emergency policy for governance is the mayor. And those are interchangeable. Fire chief can be interchanged with city council and back and forth, and even mayor can be interchangeable with city administrator.
I noticed the police chief isn't on here.
Correct. In regards to the operations and all that, we looked at the size of the teams in that, and the fact that he's got two, himself and another, and potentially three in the future, that yes, he is very much going to be involved, and he has sections within here But yeah, you're right, we didn't mention that as a continuity factor, but that's something that we looked at.
And that would be one thing that I noticed throughout this is that it's, you know, I know that what your mindset was when you wrote this, but it leans heavily towards those type of events versus the type of events that law enforcement would take the lead on.
Mhm.
So that would be my only observation from my perspective.
Yeah, the law enforcement side of things is kind of an area that is definitely an expertise as well. And and its own department that needs to be doing some various things, so they were kind of kept out of that because the priority in their job is also the security. And not necessarily being as into the problem as they are working within it. But they're not necessarily on top of it in many of these options. But when it becomes a law enforcement issue or something like that, they would definitely be the lead.
Well, and not to take up too much time, but I mean, it'll bring issues up like, for example, at the end of a fire, you then typically have looters. That's been my experience in every large event fire that I've ever had. So we've had to have, you know, a lot of control. And also establishing what is a crime scene versus what is just an emergency event. Because if it's a crime scene, then we can keep people up to and including the media, because there's evidence to be collected and protected versus if it's just an emergency event. So that's,
Yeah.
I mean, we're not gonna resolve that tonight, I know that.
Yeah, and that happened to us during the airplane into the house years ago, where we had a lot of people trying to poke in, take pictures of things that just weren't appropriate and all that. And so it was in the plan and in our ideas for emergency operation plan that we had, was that he established a perimeter and was able to keep those people out. It was a little bit of whack-a-mole. Those are the kind of scenarios I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Okay, and I'll look at how to get, and to take a look again one more time about the police chief issue and see if there's other areas that we
Yeah,
can.
we're not gonna resolve it tonight, I just
Okay.
wanted to let you know that that's coming.
Okay, so where were we here? 5-6, thank you, through 5-9. All right, this just gives you an idea of the management services. These are the different annexes that we have. On 5-5, you see management, emergency services, health and human services, and infrastructure services again. Those are now all laid out in detail about what those items are. I'll give you an example. For management services, we're going to be taking a look at information and planning, resource support, public information, volunteers and donation, business and industry. Huge factor, business and industry, contractors, excavators, food places, all of that come into this situation and can help out. That's what the management services incorporate. On page 5-7, you have the emergency services. This is another annex, and this is another group of people working on these scenes. They take care of things such as communications, firefighting, search and rescue, hazardous materials, and law enforcement is in there as well. And for example, law enforcement, we show provide crowd and traffic control, we show coordinate site security, we show coordinate additional law enforcement resources, manage evacuations, and provide urban and wilderness search and rescue. Just so happens that actually the police departments and the sheriff's department particularly are much better at search and rescue than we are at the fire department. That's not our bailiwick. They know how to organize that. So if we got into search and rescue, absolutely, we want law enforcement to come in and conduct those operations while they're doing more of the health and safety and firefighting. On page 5-8, this annex, health and human services, that includes mass care, health and medical, food and water, agricultural and animal protection. An event goes down, you have some supervisors and that are coming from medics. Well, guess who's going to be in charge of the health and human services end of things? It might be them, or it might be the county public health supervision, that group. They would be able to come in, they understand how these plans work, they can take care of these things while we're doing the others. It's the division. And the last one is the infrastructure services, which includes the transportation, the roads, keeping those open. Public works, making sure that our infrastructure is being worked on and contained. And energy, where's our fuel coming from? How are we going to get power? And this is one of the reasons, as you see, we've been preparing for this plan for a long time. We just bought those fuel containment units where we actually can now start storing our own diesel and gasoline that we haven't had before, something that hit us in the 2007 storm. Now we have the capabilities. The next page on 510 really just shows the primary and secondary people that would be in charge of all of these different various annexes. I'll use the food and water as the beginning part. So city administrator, that would be one of my tasks initially, to make sure that I knew where the supplies were. I found out what the condition was, and we began working through those. But the secondaries on those are going to be public works. It's going to be, I can't even read that, my glasses are in my truck, the fire department. It's also a secondary, could be the police department or others. So we kind of talk about primary and a secondary person to be in charge of that. We've tried to lay it out best that we can, but if none of that works, we'll find somebody, and it may be one of you.
Who's that court clerk?
Say again?
Our court clerk.
Our court clerk is Angelina.
Okay.
Angelina is our court clerk. Angelina is our building office manager and manages the building official. And she's also our planning assistant.
She's secondary to firefighting.
Well, we're gonna get down to brass tacks here eventually. Might need you to do some of that as well, Austin.
Yeah.
Here's a helmet.
Yeah. He jokes, but serious.
Concept of operations, talks about the priorities and the response. Again, first and foremost is life safety, second is property and environmental protection, and the third is stabilization and restoration. This entire plan is worked along those three things as well. What's most important and where do we end up? We have some types of emergency classifications in here. On page 6.4, we have the ICS, or the Incident Command System. And Dana, you just used another acronym for, what was the name of the California system?
It used to be ICMS,
Okay,
Incident Command Management System.
and then N first?
NIMS.
NIMS, excuse me.
Yes, National
National
Incident
Management
Management
System,
System.
which this is.
Right.
So this talks about operational coordination, what the field operations could look like, including some of the things that we need to do. Here's where we get into unified command and area command. We've already talked about this. So when no one jurisdiction, agency, organization has authority and or the resources, we go to unified command, which means it comes from just Gearhart and we bring other people in to that command structure. Area command is something that is on a much larger scale, probably closer to the September 11th or the shooting that we were talking about over there. Area command takes over. We acquiesce the leadership to a larger organization with more training. They work with us. So there are times and opportunities to go through. So that's just some information I think that was most very helpful. The next is 7.2. 7.2 is the EOC management, or the Emergency Operations Center. And then for the example, we set that up here in this room months ago. And these roles are the EOC manager, the safety officer, the public information officer, the liaison officer. That's the team of that management that comes together and helps with all of these functions. They're concentrating on overseeing what we need. Somebody's going to be in charge of logistics. Once we start getting supplies and things taken care of, and I know what we have over here, I'm going to hand that to logistics. They're going to go ahead and document it all. And then whenever we need somebody, we're going to go to logistics. So we have the EOC manager, 721, responsible for organizing and supervising, maintaining this. Could be me, probably not. I've got other functions. It would be put into somebody maybe from the fire department or somebody else within the police department could be that. Public information officer, that's pretty obvious, but these are all the things they're going to do. They're going to coordinate things. They're going to support policy. They're going to coordinate the resources. They're going to help get the media involved because the media can be very helpful. Safety officer keeps an eye on everything that we're doing.
Chad, do we have a designated public information officer?
In the fire department, we're working on that training. I had been the public information officer in the past for the fire department, so there's one for them as well. And then as far as the city of Gearhart, initially, that's one of the jobs that I would take on initially, as long as things are starting to stabilize. But then we can put somebody in, it might be a member of the media that can help us out as well. Or it can be somebody from another organization from Warrenton or the county the county does have an established public information officer on their paid staff, and we can use them as well. It may have to be you.
It's just important to know that you're gonna have one, and everybody needs to know that's the guy to send the press to ask, so that we're not all giving them different answers and
And
causing
here-
confusion.
And here are the things that they're considering during that process.
Right.
I nominate Brent.
Okay, you've been nominated, Brent.
I said, yeah.
No,
See-
no comment.
Well, that's lesson one. Gets a little complicated after that, but that's the first shot. Also, we're talking about general staff on 7.3 on page 74. So general staff in the EOC are things such as operations, a section chief that is knowledgeable about what's going on in the emergency operations and able to give the EOC an understanding. Maybe a retired firefighter, or maybe some of our older firefighters, maybe some of our command structure. We'll have a planning section chief responsible for coordinating planning, information sharing functions, assessments, facilitations, data, all of that. We'll have a logistics section chief to help arrange for food, coordinate volunteers, support the EOC communications, coordinate acquisitions, and facilitate the requests. Finance and administration. Somebody like Miss Justine becomes very important in these sorts of things, because if we are not documenting and understanding what we're paying out, what's coming in, and some of the other information, things can get really out of hand quickly.
I nominate Justine.
I think you already have, sir. As a matter of fact, Carrie kind of codified that. You know? So we have that. So you kind of see how people and what the areas that they take care of, and it's really kind of broken down into very simple things. So almost anybody can do these, or at least get them started. So that's that area that I wanted to look at. We're not going to go into 7.7. 7.8 is more of the organizational chart, kind of gives you an idea how an incident works with all the different things. I mean, debris management is a big part of this. You know, so there is a person that's going to be in charge of the debris management. It's going to be the infrastructure person. And put that together. All right. Next page, and then we're going to move on a little bit here, is 8.1.
Just a second,
Excuse me, sorry.
please. 7.8. I know this is a terrible thing to ask, but is debris management bodies and animals?
Yes, sir. It absolutely is.
Okay, thank you.
We have actually, through the grants, many people don't know this, but we actually have a supply of body bags.
I was gonna ask about that.
We have a plan to request refrigeration. And we have a plan for when that all runs out, what we're gonna do afterwards, you know, how we're going to handle these things.
Is that including carcasses of animals? Because in a flooding situation, you're going to end up with multiple.
Yeah, I think that would come up into the health and services area, to where we start considering we have these issues, and rather than spreading disease and creating more issues for ourselves, yeah, we would have to look at that for sure.
Okay.
And then that's part, the animals and things were mentioned in there, but yeah.
I just was curious because I
Yeah.
didn't, you know, see a box for that.
It was, yeah, it was kind of odd having the boxes of body bags in here for about a week or two. People were asking questions.
I could understand why. Okay.
Okay, and then before we go on to this, we're doing good time here. I just want to let you know on page 8.1, there is plans for the program sustain. The review and maintenance, the scheduled maintenance, looking at the responsibility, looking at the control authorities. Those are things that we're going to update on a scheduled basis to make sure we're going through this plan and thinking about those sorts of things. So there are things that you should expect that the city staff do to keep this current. And with at least a redo of the plan and look at it seriously every 5 years. All right. Now,
I have a question
Yes, sir.
now. And this one happens to do with the plan maintenance. I noticed, and I can't tell you where farther back, I think it was in the 3 section, but it called for different department heads keeping records and everything safe in an incident. Is that something that has been done, is doing, or is going to be done?
currently, we have paperwork and record paperwork stored in a place to where we can function with this plan using the paperwork. That's one thing that we do. In regards to the continuity of our ordinances and all of the documents that we have stored here at the city, we have them in a safe, they are protected, but we don't have a fully implemented plan on storing those in an additional place and offsite. Although we are looking at that in regards to the software that we're looking at here in the future, we have talked about adding a module that will help us take all documents, scan them in, and save them in the cloud. So we are considering that, and that'll be something that we're coming up on a project before. But currently, we're not doing an excellent job of that. Those documents, if they were destroyed, that would be a pretty bad day. Good part, though, is that the way that we handle our information from all of our past city meetings, since we've had the current website and the blog, a lot of that data is up there. So there are some documents and things. Also, as far as our zone code, municipal code, and all that is up there. But we would lose some documents if this building, we would lose a lot of documents if this building got overtaken, and we're concerned about that.
Right, and then what comes to mind is all the water valves and everything, and if you GPS them and have them on a map, has that been clouded?
It has.
Okay.
Yes, it resides, well, I don't know where the server resides, but it is all up on the cloud and it's redundant.
Okay.
So we do have those maps that would show flood zones, pipe, valves, hydrants, information about the residents and that sort of thing is all in that GIS system, and it's only improving. We keep adding information. We just added, what did we add? I'll think about it later. It's not important now. But we can add layers onto it. So yeah, that is one positive that I didn't think about before. So that's a start, but we're not done. All right, so really, we get into management 1. Actually, just going to check. Talk about that. I'm going to go to. Okay.
So this is about where the numbers started to get a little confusing. Trying to track down below and then the references to the different tables.
Yeah, we'll need to double check those, but we spent a lot of hours on this thing trying to make it, and there's very few mistakes, but I have seen a couple of them. I'm not telling you about them. We come up with a couple of them, but yeah, there's some things in here we need to fix, but the organization that we worked with was very thorough, and it was kind of exhausting.
Yeah, and actually, I'm very impressed by your work.
So the annexes, functional annexes organization, this is where the meat and potatoes are. So we've got those 4 areas that we're looking at. If we go to, and I'll give you an example of page MGT 0. Oh, they're all named MGT 0. Well, there's a problem. Okay. Let me take you to another page that'll be a little bit better than. Let's go to MGT 11. It says 6.0 roles and responsibilities. Is everybody there?
Yes.
Okay. This is really what we're going to be using the most. For the management annex, management services annex, These are the roles and responsibilities. And these are the checklists that we're gonna start going through during these processes to make sure we cover things. So under city administration, again, we're gonna coordinate the response. We're going to coordinate with our partners. We're gonna aid on identification of other resources. We're gonna advise in coordination with the PIO. It gives us the framework for how to behave in an EOC with these annexes, so all of the tasks are accomplished to the best of our ability, and that we can do for a particular operation. Under management also, under page MGT 12, you'll look at police department under management. Fire department has a portion of the management annex. So release information to the public, alert personnel developing conditions, see emergency services function annex. So it tells them to also look at the emergency services function. Those are some of the basic things that the police and the fire need to do within the management annex to make sure the coordination is happening. That includes things like supporting agencies, volunteer organizations, yes, but faith-based organizations are very powerful in these situations as well. They've got preparation, they've got space, they've got people, they've got the ability to help out, they've even got kitchens. So those are people and things that we need to think about bringing into this. Then there's the whole concept of the operations. 14 goes into the support functions, and then at the very end, how is the management group going to transition into recovery? It gives you ideas of where to head. And it shows that on MGT 15, it kind of gives you the layout of the organizational chart. Okay, so now we're going to move on to ES2.
Hey, Ted, I thought you were only gonna go to 8 o'clock.
I got 7 minutes, sir. No, oh yeah, actually, while you were not there, Preston, sorry,
Hey,
we just decided. to
It's
give
8:20,
something
it's 8, hey, it's 8:20 for Christ's sake.
Yeah, we just talked, thank you, Preston. We just talked about this. We had another half an hour. We're gonna be done in 7 minutes.
Well, wrap it up.
We'll wrap it up when I tell it's wrapped up.
Hey, Carrie,
Hey, Preston,
we've had enough of you, okay?
sir, thank you. Preston, if you wouldn't mind, we'll get it done as soon as possible, sir. All right, ES2. Purpose and scope, this is emergency services. This does exactly what we just talked about, goes through all the emergency services, stemming from communications, fire services, and all that, interagency coordination, management, and with checklists. Other people to check with, as far as other cooperation with the county and all that. It involves law enforcement as well for that functional annex. And on page 13 and 14, it kind of shows the different types of events and how the government, the city, local government, community, and all that will work through these particular individual incidents. On 15, there's the roles and responsibilities and all those checklists I was talking about for the emergency services functions. So they're trying to do all of these things as from here in the EOC through their firefighters, considering all these options. And because of time, the next annex is Health and Human Services, and that's on HHS 1, 2, and 3. It takes all the health and human services in regards to mass care, health and medical, food and water, agricultural, all the things to consider and the checklist to go along with it. Infrastructure services annex is last. There's references at the end. Shows you where we got a lot of this information. There is appendices that will have like the disaster declaration materials in there once we adopt this and get those put into place and other paperwork in order for us to conduct these operations. And glossary, resources, recommendations for the training that we should do with you folks so that you understand this process. It can be very easy, or it can go into depth for a week-long course if you want. We'll try to keep it easy, and then the fire department and I will be coordinating that and letting the people know who needs this training and figuring out a way to do it. Some of the smaller courses doesn't take a lot, but you'll learn a lot from it, and it's sometimes a day course, sometimes just a couple hours. All right, so that's the EOP. That's essentially what's in it, kind of how it works. Any questions or concerns?
I have a comment,
Yes, ma'am.
and I'm apologize for bringing up Seaside, because I know I do a lot. When the big storm of '07 hit, and all of the restaurants couldn't keep their food refrigerated, they brought it to the community center and the churches, and they fed the whole community on what they gave it. So we were having steaks and shrimp and crab. It was great. But anyway, that was a really good partnership with the churches and the city.
The volunteer fire department, the police department, and all the volunteers that were helping with us ate very well. And one of the persons that made that happen was Gretchen Good, Melissa's lady. She came in, brought in everybody's food, make sure it was fine, and made these delicious. We ate well, and we needed to. It was a lot of work.
And it was really nice for the community to all be together. I mean, people just, it was like a party, kind of, you know, it was not a party, but it was a good gathering. Say that.
Moving forward, we're gonna make some minor changes, go through this once more as a team, get comfortable with it again, and then we're gonna bring it to the city council for adoption. And I think something is laid out like this and as simple as it is, it should be something that we can adopt without, you know, an entire overhaul. Unless you folks have some big concerns in that, but we'll get into that later. But thank you very much, and I appreciate you taking a little extra time. That was a little bit bigger for an hour than I thought, but here we are.
Thank you.
And I'd also like to thank fire department, public works and the police department. They were huge in writing this and involved. Okay, that's all that I have, Mr. Mayor.
That's all that we need, Chad.
Thank you, sir.
I believe the meeting is over with.
All right, Brett, thank you.
Okay, all right. Good night, everybody.
All
Bye,
right,
Brett.
take care.
Thank you.